Earlier this month, President Trump nominated D.C. Circuit Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh to fill Justice Anthony Kennedy's seat on the Supreme Court. But Kavanaugh's confirmation will likely face some opposition, not just from Democrats, but also possibly from tech leaders because of his views on privacy and net neutrality. Senior writer for Wired, Issie Lapowsky, wrote an article called "Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court Could Spell Trouble for Tech." There she is on the left. And Joan Solsman is a senior writer for CNET. Good to see you both. So explain this. Why would tech be concerned about a Justice Kavanaugh?
Right. So we hear all about Kavanaugh's paper trail, and he has a pretty extensive one as it relates to net neutrality, which of course the tech industry vehemently supports, as well as privacy. The tech industry has really stood up for the rights of their users to have privacy, not to have the government follow them. So Kavanaugh has ruled that, for instance, with regard to net neutrality, that internet service providers have First Amendment rights. If you are following this space at all, a lot of people say that's really a fringe idea to say that an internet service provider, which a lot of people think of as the pipes, the cables, right? The people who are just providing the content to you, not making it, have First Amendment rights, and therefore the government.
First Amendment right means they can censor what they want or
it means that
price
the
as they want.
government can't regulate them and say what you must carry and what you cannot carry. And he based this on a decision from the 90s that said that cable companies have First Amendment rights. So he said, basically, the difference between carrying ESPN and ESPN.com, there is no difference. So the internet service provider should have as many rights as cable companies do with regard to what they do and don't decide to serve.
Joan, we already saw the Trump administration repeal some Obama-era net neutrality rules. So why would we be worried about what the Supreme Court is going to do about it?
Well, it's definitely going to be something that comes through the courts eventually, and it's a topic that could reach a Supreme Court, and in that case, Kavanaugh would have a say. We already know it's this fringe-level interpretation of the First Amendment. The idea that an internet service provider has the same First Amendment freedoms as a normal person, that would be, well, Alana Kagan called it weaponization style interpretation of the First Amendment. So it could have real repercussions.
So explain to me why that's a fringe idea and why that's that far from just the idea that these service providers can choose what bandwidth to give to which service. What's the difference?
Well, there's a difference between considering, there's two things at play here. There's the consideration that an internet service provider has First Amendment protections, and then there's the idea that the government should be regulating through its agencies what is and isn't allowed to be censored or suppressed or throttled on those pipes. By bringing in somebody like Kavanaugh, it could be somebody who has a deciding vote to tip it on the scale in favor of internet service providers, but maybe advocates of internet neutrality would argue isn't in favor of the broader public.
Okay, let's broaden this out to privacy a bit wider. Anthony Kennedy, a swing vote, generally a conservative, but he was helpful to more liberal causes on questions of individual liberty and sometimes privacy. It's why he wrote the same-sex marriage decisions that he did. And so this could be a really key difference, Izzy, and explain this, why Kavanaugh could be so different on these questions of privacy.
Right, so Kavanaugh has had a few opinions that deal with the Fourth Amendment and whether the government is allowed to, search people's private cars, maybe put a GPS locator on their car to track their whereabouts. Kavanaugh says that's well within the government's rights. In another case that was against the Obama administration and the bulk collection of phone records under the NSA, Kavanaugh said that, look, for national security purposes, the government can do this. The only thing the Fourth Amendment protects you from is unreasonable search and seizure. But he's saying that if the government feels that they have a special need that supersedes an individual's right to privacy, then that's well within the government's rights. So that's what you hear people like Senator Rand Paul talking about now when he says, really concerned about, Kavanaugh's views on Fourth Amendment. I think this is a different controversy than a lot of people expected. We expected that this confirmation was going to be about Roe versus Wade, and it certainly is, but we see the most outspoken senator on the right is Rand Paul, and he's talking about privacy.
Yeah, well, if you're trying to pick off a Republican, Paul, and privacy is one way to do it. When you look at the paper trail, Joan, what are the Fourth Amendment questions or bullet points that come to mind for you with Kavanaugh?
Well, with any Supreme Court justice, you have to look into so far in the future, these appointments being for life. We're dealing with a time right now where privacy and technology are one of the most fractious elements of discussion right now. Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, these companies using our information to make money and to sway elections potentially. You could see a future where, does Facebook get sued? Does that get to the Supreme Court? And Kavanaugh would have a possibly deciding factor on the way that rules.
Do tech companies care or worry about this enough to be trying to hurt Kavanaugh's nomination?
I don't think that we've seen that yet, but we certainly see tech companies care about issues like privacy. You know, their lobbying records come out. Facebook has spent, I think, more lobbying this last quarter than it has in its entire history, and that's because there are all these questions coming up about privacy, right? So I think that, you know, yeah, if during his nomination hearings this becomes a key issue, I think you could see some lobbying of members of Congress in either direction on his nomination.
Anyone else? Libertarian groups? Are there any kind of surprising people because of this, other than Rand Paul, and he could be the most important one if he votes against him? Anyone else kind of really raising alarm bells on this?
Well, I think what's interesting among tech leaders is, even though some of the paper trail for Kavanaugh does call into question how he would rule on these issues that are important to tech leaders, these tech companies are the most powerful big corporations in our country. And his record on corporations is to see them as people and to give them the protections that people have. So that could be something that tech leaders find to be welcoming.
Take the good with the bad. Okay, Joan Solsman and Issie Lapowsky, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.